everyone, it's Mary Ellen, and welcome back to my channel where we talk about all things related to the storytelling industry. If you don't already know me, I write nonfiction under my real name, Mary Ellen Quigley, and romance under my pen name, M.E. Laverne. And two things. Number one, I apologize in advance because I have a cold and I don't feel very well today. But also, as you can tell from the title of this video, it's going to be a little bit different today than what I usually talk about. Now, the first thing you're wondering is, why are we doing a paranormal story time? Right? Why do we care? You're a writing channel. Well, let me explain myself. So first of all, as you guys know, I've had this channel for a while. If you've been following me, you'll know that I've been here for over a decade, and my channel has been everything from weight loss to cancer vlogging to booktube to random ASMR and crafting. That was very brief. And now I do more AuthorTube content than anything else, but I consider myself a combination of BookTube, AuthorTube, although to be honest with you, I haven't really done BookTube in over a year. But long story short, this channel has been kind of a bit of everything. And the thing that has shocked me the most over the decade plus that I've been on here, oh my God, we're almost going on 2 decades at this point, is that I get a lot of people that message me off of YouTube. And it makes sense because if you think about it, YouTube doesn't really have a way for you to talk to somebody other than through the comment section. And sometimes people don't want to talk about what they're talking about through comments. Now, back in the early days of my channel, I would get literal emails because it had on there how to contact somebody. It still does, I believe, how to contact somebody through their email. But now that social media has grown the way that it is, most of the time people will message me on Instagram messages, or they will send me things through TikTok, which always kind of throws me a little bit. I'll be like, oh my God, you found me on TikTok and you're from my YouTube channel. But long story short, I have a lot of people that ask me to incorporate different things into this channel that I just haven't done yet because I've just been really focused on writing. But a couple things that people have asked me in messages through these different platforms, right? Number one, I've had a few requests to go back to doing a little bit more of the BookTube content, which I haven't really done on this channel on purpose. I've been keeping the focus more on my writing because I prefer to do that. But after a couple people, actually it's been about 3 or 4 people now have requested, it's not a bad idea to maybe do an end of the month wrap up with you guys. So if that's something you're interested in, let me know. I am more than happy at the end of the month, beginning of the next month, just giving you guys one video where I'm like, hey, here's everything I read and what I think about it, and just leave it as simple as that, just an extra video, because I do that anyway. I leave reviews on Goodreads and now Storygraph, so I mean, you can see my reviews anyway, but I mean, why not? It would be fun. And the other thing that they brought up, which makes a lot of sense to me, is I spend a lot of time talking about my pen name. I talk about my clean romance books that I'm writing because honestly, that has been the majority of my focus. And I don't know why, but in my head, I mentally separate the nonfiction, even though I talk about it literally on every intro. I tend to, in my head, separate the nonfiction from the fiction because the paranormal books that I write with my sister. And so I consider that part of the podcast, I guess. But realistically, the more that I've been going back to writing about paranormal, the more I'm really loving the nonfiction paranormal stuff. And even though the next couple of books I have in the works are books I'm co-writing with my sister, there are some ideas I have that I would love to just write myself. So I'm kind of really enjoying going back and looking at the paranormal stuff. And even though I enjoy my romance career, the romance writing, I think that I need to take a break for a little while, do learning of the craft, which we talked about in previous videos, and I'm really, really enjoying the paranormal. So of course, the question that I always get from people when I tell them I write ghost stories associated with historical spots in the area that I live. To explain that a little more, my first book I wrote with my sister that was traditionally published was about haunted Dearborn County, Indiana, where we talked about actual locations like buildings, schools, landmarks that are haunted by legend, and we collected all the ghost stories that were connected to those. We always get asked, how did you get into the paranormal? How, do you really believe in ghosts? And how did you get into the paranormal? To which we always say, yes, we believe in ghosts, and we got into the paranormal because we grew up in a haunted house. So I thought it would be fun to sit here and talk to you guys a little bit about growing up in a haunted house. A lot of people think I'm nuts, but unless you've experienced ghosts and haunting, right, you don't get it. I feel like in the same way that someone who has experienced that stuff does. So I thought I would give you just a couple of experiences that I've had with ghosts. And then I would love to know if you have any ghost stories. This is a paranormal, growing up in a haunted house story time. Okay, so a little bit about the house history. So I grew up in a house that was built in the early 1900s. I have the records, and it was commissioned to be built back in like 1908, 1909, and the house was finished in 1911. So the house is very, very old, and I lived there my entire childhood. So the house is actually my mother's childhood home. Her father passed away in 63 or 64, I think 63. Pretty sure it was 63. He passed away when my mother was in high school, and with the life insurance money, my grandmother, who had 3 children that were teenagers, decided to buy a house. And she ended up buying the house. She did a few years later get remarried, all that stuff. But my mother basically spent the last part of high school and her 20s in this house until she moved out and got married on her own. And when my sister was little, that was Grandma's house. So they would go to Grandma's house for Christmas and all of that. And then when I was born, I think that my parents moved in, I believe the summer after I was born. So I was like less than 6 months old. And we moved into that house, and suddenly it became our house. And we lived there my entire life until my mother had her stroke and my parents had to get rid of the house, and we moved downstate to be with Mom. So I lived there till I was probably in my late 20s. So I'm trying to do the math. 2011, so I was 29. 2010. So I was 28 when we moved out of the house. So my entire life I lived there. The only way I can describe that house is the house was alive. To put it mildly, every single person, I believe, pretty sure every single person in my family has had a paranormal experience in that house, at least on my mother's side of the family. Because my dad's side of the family, not so much because they weren't there, but my mom's side of the family, everyone has a ghost story associated with the house. Now, one of my favorite ghost stories is actually about me seeing ghosts in the alley, but I'm not going to rehash that again because if you want to see it, I actually did do a TikTok about it, and I recently interviewed with a podcast, like a ghost podcast, where they're going to tell my stories, so I don't want to tell it yet again. But if you want to go see it, there is a link to my TikTok below and you can go check it out and you can hear the story about the ghosts in the alley. But I thought I would share a couple more. So one of the freakier experiences that both me and my sister dealt with was what we like to call the man in black. Now, considering the time that our house was built, this man looks like he's probably from like maybe the 1920s. You can see the outline of the person, but you can't actually make out any features of the person. And the way that our house was made is you had our dining room, and then off the dining room, you had like it was kind of like a line. So you had like the living room, the front door, the living room, right? Dining room, kitchen. And then off of the dining room, you had a bedroom, you had a bathroom, and then off of the kitchen, you had the master bedroom. So me and my sister shared a room as children, and we were in the bedroom that was off the dining room. And every night when we went to bed, we would sleep with the door open. We did because the room honestly was so small that with 2 twin-size beds in, you couldn't shut the door. So we had to leave the door open. That's how small the room was. And so the door would be open and we could see out into a part of the living room and the dining room. And what would freak us out is there was a tall man that would stand in the doorway between where the dining room and the living room met. And when you think back to the time period of the house, he looked like he was probably from the 1920s because he was in you could see the outline where it was like a tall, slender man in like what would have been like a suit type thing. As you could see like the coattails and then a top hat. I mean, it was a tall, slender man with a top hat. It was never menacing. It wasn't evil. It would just stand and look at you. And it terrified me so bad that I would pull my covers up to like cover my eyes, and I would fall asleep like that because I didn't want to look out and see the tall man. And I can tell you that I lived there all the way up until my late 20s. That man was there almost every night. Now, obviously, when I got older, I would shut the door because I was no longer sharing with my sister. And so I would just shut the door. But if you opened the door and left it open, that man was there. Even more creepy was that the man would be seen at other places in the house. One other spot that we would see, now this is kind of weird. It was a very old house, so you have to understand where we're coming from. We didn't have a shower upstairs. We had just like a shower stall that was put in downstairs in the basement, which I realize sounds really, really weird, but there was no shower in like the early 1900s. It was a bathtub upstairs. If you wanted to take a bathtub, you took a bath upstairs. If you wanted a shower, you went downstairs and you took a shower. So you would be downstairs in the shower, but this room was like a big room. And it was where the laundry stuff was. So you would be taking a shower in the laundry room, essentially. And then on the other side of the laundry room, it made like an L. There was a storage room where you had the furnace and the pantry and all that items, but it was a storage room. And it was also very common when you were taking your shower. I used to turn on every light down there because you could see the outline of the man when you were like taking your shower. You would also see this man, which we're pretty sure this was residual, because a residual haunting, for those of you who don't know, is basically like a snapshot in time. It's not a ghost that interacts with you. It's just a ghost that you can see, but it's kind of like a recording of something. And we're pretty sure that what we saw was residual, because that same man would also walk up the stairs, because we had a downstairs area, and you walked up the back door and up the stairs into the kitchen. And if you were sitting in the living room or even in the dining room and certain time of night and the lighting was just right, you could see the outline of this tall man walk up the stairs and into my mother's room. But that also makes sense if you think about someone coming home from work at the end of the day. And especially if they were the man of the house, they would have went in that back door, because that's where the driveway is. They would have went in the back door, up the stairs and into the bedroom to change clothes. So we're pretty sure that was residual. But yeah, the man in black is what we called him. And that ghost was very commonly seen in our house, never interacted with you, just stared very creepily. So we don't know what that was, but it was definitely freaky. Another really creepy thing we had was just poltergeist activity. I had this really more so when I was in my high school years, middle school and high school years, and up into college, where the ghost would actually move things, which would always freak us out. So a couple of examples of poltergeist activities I had, and the only way I can describe it is it's almost like the ghost either knew what you were getting ready to do or knew what you were thinking. So a couple of examples. Well, one time I was in my bedroom and I was putting makeup on and getting ready for school in the morning, and I had one of those old plastic caboodles where you open and it has has all the layers, and I was opening my caboodle to grab makeup. And I was in the middle of doing my makeup and I was like, ooh, I really don't like this eyeshadow color. So I'm going to reach and I'm going to grab, whatever color. And I was just thinking it to myself because I obviously was not having a conversation with myself about makeup. So I reach over to my bed to grab my caboodle and to open it up to get the makeup. And as soon as I open it up, the caboodle just flips over. Just flips right over, and all the makeup just goes flying all over my bed. And I hadn't touched it. I wasn't even holding it at the time. I just undid the latch and the whole thing just, and it freaked me out because you could feel it pick up and flip. It was really creepy. Another instance, my mom and dad were out to dinner or out somewhere, and I was in the house by myself. And one of the things I like to do when my parents were out of the house was I liked to bust out my dad's good stereo. He had the big black speakers and the whole glass case. Look, that was some fancy crap back in the 90s, okay? He had the fancy stereo. And so I would go get my cassette tapes because I didn't have CDs back then, my cassette tapes, and I would blast my music on the good stereo. Okay. And so I heard a noise and I got up to walk over to the window so I could look out because I was like, oh crap, if my parents are home, I got to turn this off really quick because I don't know I'm using dad's good stereo. And I was probably maybe 14 or 15 at the time. And so I run over to the window to look. On my way back to the stereo, the cassette tape stops and rewinds. Now, consider that this is a 90s cassette player. In order to stop the tape and rewind it, it was not digital. This was the type where you had to press the button. and then press the button to rewind. That would not have been like, there's a lot of like digital cassette players nowadays, but that wasn't a thing. We didn't have that kind. Like, we had the old clunky kind. You had to press the buttons, like click them down. And there's no way, I mean, I wasn't over there. Like, I was all the way on the other side of the room. So what pressed the button? You can take a few guesses. Another thing was it would not be uncommon for things to move around. And the most creepy experiences I had was the weeks prior to moving. I was obviously down in those creepy freaking storage rooms trying to figure out what we were taking with, what we weren't taking with. I was trying to box up, 30 plus years of marriage and figure out how to condense it down into an apartment-sized living situation. And I was down there trying to figure out what to do. So I ended up at one point in time going upstairs to grab lunch. So I was upstairs for maybe an hour. And when I had left some things like in piles around boxes because I was going to come back and like reconsider what we were taking, what we weren't. And the chair was left open because I was sitting in the chair and sorting through piles. When I came back downstairs an hour later, the piles had been moved and there were things sitting on the chair. I was the only person in the house. So we had a lot of poltergeist experiences in that house. All right, and I'll give you guys one more ghost story. Honestly, I have so many stories attributed to this house that I could write an entire book, which, fun fact, my sister and I are actually in the process of compiling all of this information and writing a book about our experiences. But another really creepy experience I had was I was in high school at the time, and the carpeting in my room went bad. And the funny thing about our house is because the house was so old, there were layers of flooring on layers of flooring. That's the only way I could possibly describe it. It used to be a running joke because you would take up flooring in one of the rooms and you never knew what you were going to find. So in my particular bedroom, we had carpet. Underneath the carpet was sticky tiles. Underneath that was several layers of linoleum. And then underneath that was like another couple layers of linoleum. There was like 4 layers of linoleum until we got down to basically what was the wood floor. And the wood floor was in terrible shape. And basically we had to clean all of that out, clean it up as best as we could. And then my dad got more sticky tiles because we were just trying to bide time until we could afford to do something better. But one of the layers of linoleum that we took up was tile for a baby's nursery. Like, it was probably from, I want to say, the 30s or 40s. It was really cool, and we were like laughing at all the different layers, but we cleaned it up, we put down the sticky tiles, and then let it settle, and then we put all my stuff back in the room. So that first night back in my bedroom, I am laying in bed, and as you guys may know, if you're in the paranormal field, anytime you renovate a house that's haunted, it stirs up the ghosts. And this was no exception. I used to have an old TV that had a sleep timer on it, and I would go to bed with the TV on, but I would set the sleep timer. And I would usually set the sleep timer for 20 or 30 minutes, and then it would just turn off after I fell asleep. That particular night, I was just drifting off. Like, just drifting off. And as my eyes are kind of like, and I'm getting ready to go, I just felt like something was staring at me. So I opened my eyes, and there is a figure, and this was not the man in black. This was just a dark figure, but it didn't have the top hat, so it was not the dude from the dining room. Walks into my room, stands right next to my bed, stares down at me, and disappears. And when I tell you that I was so scared, I couldn't even scream. I don't know if you've ever been in that situation where you are literally so terrified that you can't scream. And I was like, my dad was at that time sleeping out in the living room because he had just gotten out of his heart surgery. Like, he had just recently had a heart surgery, and him and mom didn't want to sleep together because he would be up and down. And anyways, long story short, he was right outside my room in the living room. And I just kept thinking to myself, I need to scream for my dad. But I was so terrified I couldn't get the scream out. And I was like, oh my God. And it absolutely terrified the crap out of me. And for a long time afterwards, I kept thinking to myself, well, maybe it was a dream. Maybe I was drifting out and I was partially dreaming. But then about 4 or 5 months later, my dad was talking to me and we were having a conversation about some of the ghost stuff in the house. And he goes, I had a really weird experience a few months back after we had put the flooring down in your room. And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, I got up to go to the bathroom, and as I was laying back down, there was a man that walked into your room. And I thought, what? You didn't say anything to me? Because I literally about pooped my pants. I couldn't even scream. And my dad saw it, and he's like, I didn't want to wake you up because I knew it was just the ghost. And I was like, oh my God, you saw it too. So anyways, for anybody who's like, why are you interested in the paranormal? That was my house growing up. All right, so those are my ghost stories about my house that I grew up in. And I love talking about the experiences I had growing up because, to be honest with you, as a child, I felt like it was something I needed to hide. And I've done research on the house. There's a lot of history just in our neighborhood and our house in general. And just the fact that we grew up in a very low income, high poverty area of the city, where there was a lot of steel mills and factories and just blue collar working people. And the factories were not safe back in the day. It was not uncommon for your husband to go to work and not come back. And my mom even talked about as a child, with her father, who also did factory work, it was not uncommon that things would happen, and they would be factories and things in your own neighborhood. So that's just how we grew up. I feel like as I get older, I don't mind sharing my paranormal experiences because it's not embarrassing to me. But I can remember as a child being made fun of. And then we also had a very religious family. And, I've talked about my Christian upbringing quite a bit. But I can remember in church, ghosts or demons. And so you didn't talk about growing up in a haunted house. It was shameful to have a haunted house. And so it became where we just didn't talk about it. And then as I got older, I began researching the paranormal because I had questions, right? Why did that stuff happen to me? Why was our house that way? Why were we always feeling like we had eyes on us? And why was there always weird things going on? And when I started talking to other like-minded people who also grew up with paranormal experiences, because honestly, if you're in the paranormal field, most of us are in it because we've had personal experiences. And when you start talking to these people, you realize I'm not nuts and I'm not weird, and this is something that happens to other people. And I think that's why I enjoy it, because it makes me feel validated. And also, totally going down a Christian upbringing side note here, a lot of people believe that paranormal drives you away from your belief system, but it actually strengthens mine, because the whole idea of the Christian whole Christian lexicon idea is we're spirits, and when we die our spirit goes to be with the Lord. Well, ghosts are spirits. I mean, it just kind of reiterates the fact that something happens after you die. What is it? Nobody knows, but something happens after you die. So I actually feel like it strengthens my faith rather than takes away from my faith, if that makes sense at all. So anyway, yeah, that's why I like to write paranormal books. And I have been, getting back into it and doing research and things. And I think I'm going to probably work this weekend on the next book project that I'm doing with my sister. And I'm really enjoying it. I love writing romance, but there's something about taking history and connecting it to some kind of legend, myth, or haunting, and making it more alive for other people. Because one of the really cool things about the first book we wrote is that we have kids that have come up to my sister and to me when we've done events, that have talked about the history of certain buildings that they didn't know, but they learned because they wanted to read the ghost stories. And that makes me feel better that we're keeping history alive in some form or another. For some of these locations that would otherwise be forgotten. So anyways, have you had any paranormal experiences? I would love to hear about it. And if you don't care about ghosts and you're like, I'm just here to listen to you ramble, what are you working on? What books are you working on? How many words did you get written this week? Tell me all about it. If you like this video, give me thumbs up, like, share, comment, do all the things. Otherwise, I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.